The year is 2018, and how are we doing as a country? Just over a week ago, I got to go whitewater rafting with Max and Willie and another friend. We piled onto a school bus that was jam-packed, full of all different kinds of people. People that lived in rural North and South Carolina and Tennessee, and people who were from big cities who had come to visit and to go whitewater rafting as their tourist experience. The bus was so crowded that this very overweight woman who was shoved into a small bathing suit had to sit right next to me. She was really, really loud and kept chanting that we should be cheering for the bus driver and just yammering on and yelling. And I thought, wow, whew, I got to sit next to somebody. Her husband was seated behind me, and he tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, "Don't worry, honey. She's a bit delusional. She's the only Democrat in our whole family." Just yesterday, I got my hair cut at the hair salon, and it was interesting. The young woman who cut my hair said the very same thing about the lady who sat behind the phone. She said, "Oh, don't pay attention to Elizabeth. She's delusional. She's a Republican." Delusional. In 1775, George Washington became commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. A farmer and a land surveyor, he was brilliant. He led this new nation to victory. In 1783, however, he resigned as commander-in-chief because he was concerned that he was getting too much power. In 1787, he was unanimously selected to lead the Constitutional Congress, the first one ever. And then he was elected President of the United States of America, where he served for 2 terms. In 1794, the federal government, for the very first time, divided itself into 2 political parties. One party was called the Democratic Republican Party, which would be an anomaly today. The other party was called the Federalist Party. Thomas Jefferson was in charge of one party, and Alexander Hamilton, the spokesperson for the other. But George Washington deliberately did not join either party. In 1797, George Washington ended his second term and decided not to run again, which is why every president today can only run for 2 terms. In his farewell address, George Washington said some very prophetic things. Standing before the nation, he gave them what he called a solemn warning. "I warn you against dividing this country into 2 political parties," he said. "Because what happens when you do this is you reach human beings' more base nature. You make everyone think that all issues are black and white. You make everyone think that it is simple to run a country. The danger is that people will be pulled to extremes and that they will stop listening to one another and that they will lose respect for the complexity of the difficult decisions that need to be made." But people were afraid, and they wanted to define themselves according to their beliefs. And they didn't listen. I think we're always afraid, aren't we? Abraham was afraid when God called him into a new land, into the promised land, when he followed God into the unknown. Our ancestors were afraid when they came to this country and searched for a new land. Our brothers and sisters in this community who have come as immigrants today were afraid when they came to this as their new land. We all are afraid, and we all want to make this place the best that it can be. We want to be free. We want to be just. We want to be kind. But sometimes in our fear, we forget to follow God. In the gospel for today, Jesus tells us that we have to learn to love our enemies. We have to move beyond our fear and learn to love the people that offend us, the people who we cannot understand, the ones whose points of view just make absolutely no sense to us at all. We have to learn to love them if we are ever to change this world to be the world that God intends. Jesus tells us to love our enemies, and sometimes I feel like saying to Jesus, can you just make it a little easier? Are you sure I have to love that person? And if so, how do I start? What does it mean to love them? Does it mean I have to agree with them? No. Does it mean I have to have warm, fuzzy feelings about them? No. But I think it does mean that we need to listen, respect, and try to understand. If we, in this cathedral, are to model love at the core of our being and in the core of this city, we are going to have to learn to listen to one another. And I believe God has called us for this purpose because this church is more diverse than any other, I think, in this country right now. We have very smart Democrats and very smart Republicans. We have homeless people and millionaires. We have people of every race and socioeconomic class, and we sit and we still worship together. Thanks be to God. We are blessed to have the leadership of Greg Kaufman, who is a retired Lutheran pastor who has devoted his life to civil discourse. Civil discourse, in my mind, is a practical way of learning to love your neighbor. A number of months ago, we met at St. Philip's Church, the little black church on the other side of town. We talked about guns and crime, and we sat together with a black man who had been incarcerated unjustly, with a white cop who was terrified to go into a crack house because he thought he might die and he had a 3-year-old at home. We talked about life not just from the point of view of the issue, but from the narrative of the person. We began to understand why each person feels the way they feel, how deep and complicated these issues are, but how we have to learn to communicate if we're ever to truly solve them. There's a great author, an Irish author, called James Stevens, and he says if you're to learn to love your enemy, maybe you start just by the act of curiosity. Maybe you can't really stand them, but maybe you can be curious about them. How is it that they came to think this way? How is it that they have the opinions that they have? How did they grow up? What was their childhood like? Where were they raised? What language do they speak? What is their culture? And in so understanding and listening, ironically, then we become truly free. And then they become free. And then minds change and hearts change. And then the kingdom of God is possible. Sometimes this kind of unity happens not just from listening, but from facing catastrophe together, because we're forced to see one another as human beings. Let me take you back to my crowded bus, okay? So the bus broke down. And there I am sitting next to this lady, sweaty, loud. And I can't really figure out what happened because it seems like the guide is like high on pot and maybe he forgot to fill up the gas tank. And he tells me that they don't even have a gauge on the gas tank. They send out 2 little buses. And I look around and say to the people, why don't we let the little children get on first? And everyone agrees. We finally get everybody onto the river, and we're paddling in our inflatable boats, and guess what happens? It was one of those days where everything goes wrong. There's an enormous thunderstorm, like I've never seen before, and it starts pelting down on us in just incredible. The rain is so hard it hurts, and we're paddling hard, and the kids are crying, and guess what? Everybody forgot about politics. We decided that we needed to get under the bridge, and we needed to get the children out of the boats because they were scared. By the time we got back on the bus, everybody was wet and filthy and laughing. We ended up singing bad rock music all the way home. Love your enemies. Love those that hate you. Love those that persecute you. Be perfect, Jesus said, even as God is perfect. Remember, my friends, God is Trinity. God is not 2. God is 3. Maybe we need to find the 3rd way.